Thanks so much, Bob. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be able to be here to share with you today. And so you might have noticed the change. We have been going through Matthew, and we're planning to go back into that today. But I just felt God speaking to me through this passage this week, and just felt to share it. So again, it's probably mostly me preaching to myself like normal, but hopefully God's speaking to you through it as well. But yeah, I just really wanted to thank everybody again, just for all your prayers and support and help while I've been on leave. It was great to have a month off, with our new baby coming, and I've actually had 2 months off speaking, and part of the reason for that was it's hard to know when a baby's going to arrive, and it's also hard to get people to preach last minute, so I thought better to be safe and just have some margin either side, and she ended up coming right in the middle, which was really great, and I hope you've enjoyed the last couple of months, because it's been a bit different. Obviously, I've been on leave, and Matt's been on leave, and I've had a whole lot of different people speaking on Sundays, and normally you sort of have a guest speaker once every now and then, but we just had a heap all together, so really thank you for understanding that sort of a unique time, and it's great to have different people from Rivers speaking and people outside speaking as well, which is really cool, but it's always a little bit risky when you get people to speak, because I suppose sometimes you don't know what they're going to say, and I guess the biggest fear of a pastor is that they're going to say something really wrong, and then you have to get up here and sort of correct it, and that's never really happened to me before, but Steve Gray did come last week and speak, and I sort of thought that he'd be fine, because he's a Church of Christ pastor in Burleigh Heads, but I just thought I really need to start by sort of just addressing something that he said that I disagreed with, because he started his message saying, Tim won't tell you this, but it's actually really hard to be a pastor in 2023, and he was just talking about how it's difficult to be a pastor, and he got me up to pray for me, which I really appreciated, but I just need to tell you that I disagree with it. It's not hard. It's impossible. You guys thought I was really serious about something. But it's true, right? And it's something that I actually say to myself sometimes. It's not hard, it's impossible. And that's not just true for pastors in 2023, it's true for pastors all the time. And it's not just true for pastors, it's true for all people who follow Jesus, that we're not called to just do something that's a little bit hard, that we've got to work harder at, that we've got to figure it out, we've got to make it happen. We can just, if we get the right idea, we'll get better. It's not, what we're actually called to is impossible. When we're a church, right? We're not called to just get people in a building on a Sunday and have someone talk for half an hour and sing some songs and go home. Like that, anyone can do that, right? That's not what this is about. We are called to see God's kingdom come on earth, to see lives transformed. In our unique context, we're seeking to be intergenerational and unified across backgrounds and cultures and generations and being one in Jesus to represent the kingdom, and that requires a miracle of God. It requires God to move. It's not just our strategies and plans and insights that are going to make it happen. And it's likely that in your own life, God will call you into things that are impossible. He doesn't give us tasks that are, this will be easy for you, you can do it, you'll be fine. Like, he calls us to things that we cannot do. He calls us to things that are impossible, that are daunting, that are scary, but that he wants to show himself faithful in. And we see this again and again in the story of Israel. So we're going to look at this today and go through this passage that I've just been loving this passage this week. It's just been a great encouragement to me. And what we've been doing as well in the services is trying to have some different ways to pray. And part of that has been to just help as we gather in church, that we're not just coming here to spectate or to watch, but actually to engage with God. And you might have noticed sometimes we've had open mics and things like that, and different ways of praying. And today, throughout the sermon, I'm just going to give you some opportunities to reflect and to pray as well. So we're sort of looking at this passage, but I want you to be thinking about situations in your own life as well. So I'm just going to pray really quickly, and then we'll start. So we thank you for your word, Lord, and its power, and thank you for your spirit with us. And we just pray that you would break into our minds, into our hearts, and bring life and freedom, and protect this time in your name. Amen. Okay, so Israel was called into impossible battles, impossible situations again and again. People sometimes might think that, say, going into the promised land, the wars that Israel fought, like that, like there's some big superpower coming to dominate some small nations. Like, that's not the case. Almost all the time, they are the underdog. They are incredibly small, they have very limited weaponry, and they're going up against a massive empire before them. And these are the instructions from Deuteronomy as to what to do when that happens. So it says this in the first part of Deuteronomy 20. When you go to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than yours. That's just the first part of the verse. So I just want to stop there because this is assumed. That says when they go to war, they are going to see the army is greater and they have horses and they have chariots and that God's people Israel, they don't. They have limited weaponry. The situation again and again is that they are outmanned and outgunned. That from a human perspective, the situation is absolutely hopeless. And that is also true, again, I'm saying, in battles that God will call us to fight. In the battles that he's called the church to stand in throughout all of history. Often, situations where you are outmanned, outgunned, overwhelmed, but actually called to it. And it's actually quite helpful just to acknowledge that, to actually see the reality of the impossible battle and actually just name it for what it is. That actually in our own strength we can do nothing of value. Right? We can't bring God's kingdom with our plans and our strategies and our insights and our own strengths. We can do nothing. And I think just to acknowledge that, sometimes there's a battle that you might be facing and fighting, and actually, if you're honest, in yourself can do nothing. It's impossible. There's something freeing about that I like to say to myself, it's not hard what we're called to as a church. It's not hard what I'm called to as a pastor. It's impossible because it shows the answer is not just working a bit harder, it's actually God. Because the danger of not seeing the impossible battle and naming it what it is the danger is that we can sort of just shrink it down and just try and do something manageable. Let's just do something over here that's not too hard, that's a bit more comfortable, but it's actually not what God's called us to, or not what he said to do, and we actually abdicate the battle. So even though it can be scary, it's helpful just to think, well, what is God actually calling us to? What is God calling you to? What does it mean to follow Jesus? And just acknowledge that in yourself it is actually impossible. So I'm just going to give you a moment, again, as I said, we're going to pray through this message very briefly, but I just want you to think personally, what does it look like for you to name an impossible battle in your life at the moment? What is an impossible battle that maybe you're facing? Maybe it's a health challenge. Maybe it's a family challenge. Maybe it's just an aspect of following Jesus that feels absolutely impossible. Loving your enemies, laying your life down. Maybe it's fear. Where do you feel outnumbered and outgunned, overwhelmed? And you don't have to do anything with it, but just simply acknowledge it. Hey, God, this is impossible. I'm just going to give you a moment to do that now. I think the temptation sometimes is to not name it, to sort of think, oh, it's not too bad, like just to minimize it, make it manageable, downplay the struggle, because to actually acknowledge the reality of the challenges that maybe God's called you to, maybe the challenges of where the church is in the world and what the future is going to look like, to name the impossibility, the temptation then is to be afraid, right? Because if you're facing an overwhelming army that you can't do anything about, like that is scary. But Israel are called again and again to see the impossible battle and to not be afraid. That actually those two things have to go together. So if you read the rest of that verse, when you see this greater army with greater chariots, with greater horses, don't be afraid of them. because the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt will be with you. So they are not to be afraid because God is with them. He will deliver them again. He's already delivered them from the superpower of the world, Egypt, when they were slaves, when they had no power at all. God moved powerfully. They didn't have to do anything, and he rescued them from Egypt. So when it says, don't be afraid, God is with you, it's not like a platitude or just some ethereal, abstract idea. It's that he actually delivered them. He actually fought for them. And they're just saying, so don't be afraid. He'll do it again. He's done it before. He'll do it again. The situation looks hopeless, but actually, the greater reality is that they have an abundance of might and strength and military power in the Lord. It's actually nothing at all to be afraid of in these battles where, humanly speaking, they're totally outnumbered. But the challenge is to believe that and to not give in to fear. So the priest's job is to charge the army and make sure that they don't get afraid. It says this, when you are about to go into battle, the priest shall come forward and address the army. He shall say, hear Israel, today you're going into battle against your enemies. This is really strong. 4 things. Do not be faint-hearted or afraid. Do not panic or be terrified by them. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory. Again, it's this small group with inferior technology going up against this huge army and say, don't be afraid, you're going to win. Don't be afraid, God is with you. Just don't freak out. It looks bad, but it's actually not. There's nothing at all to worry about. This is not at all a problem for the Lord. And that's the only thing that really matters. They don't need to get more army. They don't need to get better technology. They don't need to worry about what they have or don't have. They just need to recognize God is with them and don't need to run away. So there's the reality of the challenge of the impossible battle in this situation, but there's a greater reality of the Lord with us, who worked before. It's like guys like Moses, right, parting the waters, and delivered them from Egypt. He says, remember that God did that in the past, and he can do it again. He is there. The situation spiritually is that actually, if you're up against the biggest army in the world, but you have God on your side, there's nothing at all to worry about. It's no problem. You have more than enough. Paul says it this way in Romans 8. If God is for us, who can be against us? There's actually nothing to be afraid of. But it's so easy to forget. So the command and the encouragement is strongly to remember what God had done. Remember how he delivered. Remember what he did. And the same for us. We can remember what he's done in history, what he's done in the scriptures, what he's done in church history, what he's done in our own lives, because it's so easy to forget and just see the impossible situation and give in to fear, which means we don't trust and we run away and we give up. And I find that I can even do that sometimes. Again, just sort of thinking about what we're called to as a church, what we're called to as the big church in the world, and the struggles and the challenges that we face in our day and age, and just thinking, well, what's the future going to look like? How's it going to work? I can easily give in to fear and think, well, is it all just going to fall apart? Like, am I just going to fall apart? Like, what's it going to look like in 10 years? What's it going to look like in 20 years? And it so easily can see challenges and see problems and just lose hope. But then if you actually just remember God, it's really silly to be afraid of anything like that. It's like, really? Like, God has been faithful for 2,000 years to his church and we're going to stuff it up? Like, it's all going to fall apart because of us? Like, no, he's not going to give up on his church. He will finish what he started. He has the victory. This verse has encouraged me greatly at times like that in Psalm 145. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. Your dominion endures through all generations. God is going to do it. And we're a part of it, but it's not all on us. It's not dependent on us. And we actually need to remember him. Remember, it's his battle, and therefore we don't have to be afraid. And that's really the main thing that we have to do, is just not be afraid and trust him to stand in the impossible battles he calls us to. So it's going to give you another moment to think through what that might look like personally. What does it look like to remember the greater reality of the Lord, to acknowledge an impossible situation and the reality of that, but there's a greater reality of the Lord with us. So take a moment to remember the Lord in the midst of your battle, whatever it is. remember what he's done in the past, thank him for his presence and power, and ask him to open your eyes, like Elisha said, that those who are with us are actually greater than those against us, because God is with us. So again, I'll just give you a moment to do that now. Now, I just was doing that this week and just trying to name the challenges, see the reality, but then say, well, there's a greater reality, God. And hopefully when that starts to happen, you can feel it lift. The pressure comes off. It's not so fearful. Actually, we might not know the answer, but we know that he does. We can rest. And then there's actually a great freedom that comes from that shift in perspective. That actually we have him, we have what we need. And we see this in the rest of this passage, because what God says to do is like unthinkable strategy. It's totally counterintuitive, and it looks ridiculous. When they're facing an impossible battle, an overwhelming army, their strategy is to actually shrink their army further, so that people can go home and enjoy their new house. Right? Like, this is what it says. The officers shall say to the army, so these are the officers, the leaders of the army. Just look how relaxed they are to be. Shall say to the army, has anyone built a new house, has not begun to live in it? Let him go home, or he may die in the battle, and someone else may begin to live in it. Has anyone planted a vineyard and not begun to enjoy it? Let him go home, or he may die in the battle, and someone else may enjoy it. Has anyone become pledged to a woman and not married her? Let him go home, or he may die in the battle, and someone else may marry her. This is crazy, right? Like, these are the leaders of the army when they're the underdogs, and if they are in faith, recognizing that God is with them, they can just be totally relaxed. So they're not worried about losing. They just say, well, we don't want these people who have just done these cool things to miss out and die. Like go home. And it's God. Like, this is God saying this, right? Like it's like God cares about the battle, but he cares about people's lives as well, and he doesn't want them to enter a tragic situation like this. And if God wasn't with them, this would be an absolutely terrible idea, right? And if they weren't in faith and courage, they would be doing the opposite. The officers would be saying, we need every person here, we need everyone to let their family go, their fields go, who cares? We got to fight this battle because we're all going to die. Like that makes sense, right? That's sort of a human response. But the opposite, the greater reality of the Lord, means actually you can release these people. It's actually fine. There's actually no problem, because the only thing that matters is whether God is with them. They're already outnumbered. It doesn't matter if they're outnumbered more. It's irrelevant. The only relevance is God's presence with them. So they shrink their army. But then they do it even further. It says in verse 8, then the officers shall add, is anyone afraid or faint-hearted? Let him go home, so that his fellow soldiers will not become disheartened too. When the officers have finished speaking to the army, then they shall appoint commanders over it. So they shrink it further. And this is interesting, because just before, the priest's job is to say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't panic. Don't be terrified. God is with you. He delivered you. Like, to really encourage them. But then the officers come along who are trusting God. They're obviously relaxed. And they say, hey, who's afraid? Go home. Like, you can leave. And it'd be pretty interesting to see what happened. And it's probably a good chance that a lot of people went home. Maybe some people said, I was feeling afraid, but now I'm in. But when this happened in the story of Gideon in Judges 7, 22,000 people went home. And I just imagine being like the person who was like, I'm not afraid, I'm staying. And then 22,000 people leave. You're like, but it's kind of like, well, if you're staying because God's with you, then 22,000 people leave, who cares? Like, that is irrelevant. God didn't leave. He's still there. There's actually this freedom that means it doesn't matter what size the army is. It only matters whether we're trusting the Lord. And even in this case, it seems strategic that the worst thing that could happen is fear spread among everyone and people don't trust the Lord. So it says, if you're afraid, don't let your fear spread. Like, we just want people who have faith and courage. That's all that is required. And this is just an amazing picture of, in an overwhelming, impossible battle, just being totally relaxed, being able to release others and not live in reactivity, but just wholehearted before the Lord. So I think this is what we can do, is actually relax in the Lord, release others, and don't react. They're not giving in. And again, we see this in David, right? In the story of David and Goliath. This is the ultimate example of the underdog, the under-resourced, the overwhelmed, the outgunned situation where David is the only one with faith. He's totally relaxed. God has delivered him before. He'll do it again. Everyone around him is anxious and afraid and worried, but he releases them. He gives them the armor. He's not worried. He doesn't react to them. He just wholeheartedly trusts God. One person doing that just transforms the whole thing, and God brings a victory. He's not frustrated that everyone else isn't believing as well. He just says, I'm just going to trust God. And God works through his sling and his stone powerfully. Because it's so easy to just react to everybody else, to react to how many people are in the battle, how many other people are fighting, how many other people are standing up. Are they doing it? Are they not? And then we can so easily fall into fear again. But if all that matters is that God is with us, then what matters is actually how we are responding to him, not how others are responding. And actually we can release others because that's between them and God. We need to respond wholeheartedly to God. This is not so much saying for us that it's okay just to not fight, right? It's okay just to go home. That's not really the point, because that's between you and God. But it's saying don't put that on other people. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Worry about what you're doing, how you are responding to God in faith and courage, regardless of what they do. Don't be affected by them. This is what it means in the song, I have decided to follow Jesus, though none go with me, still I will follow. Doesn't matter what everyone else is doing. It just matters that God is there and I'm following him. And again, if we think about the future of the church, again, there's so many things that could make us anxious and afraid and worried. If I think about what it means to be a pastor, if you think about what it means to follow Jesus and increasing challenges, maybe facing different problems that you're facing, what does it look like to actually see God is with us so we can actually relax, so we don't have to be worried, can release others. Like David says in Psalm 4, in peace I will lay down and sleep. For you, Lord, make me dwell in safety. So again, I just give you a moment to pray and respond. What does it look like to relax in the Lord in a battle that you're facing? Maybe even just picture what could that look like to actually just be relaxed. And be relaxed doesn't mean be complacent. It doesn't mean abdicate. It just means rest in the Lord in the midst of it. Are there people that I need to release and stop reacting to? And how is the Lord asking you to respond to him? So again, I'll just give you a moment. You might like to take some more time later to continue to think through these questions and this perspective. Again, obviously it's just about acknowledging the reality, acknowledging the greater reality of the Lord, and then recognizing all that matters is us wholeheartedly responding to him. No, it doesn't matter what others are doing. It matters how we're going to respond and trust in the midst of the battle and relax in the midst of the battle. And actually, there's a great example of this. It's not a war, a battle. It's a storm, but it's an impossible situation where Jesus is asleep. The disciples are freaking out. They're afraid. They're going to die. Everything's going wrong. That's what it looks like. There's lightning, there's thunder, and Jesus is absolutely relaxed. So much so that he can just sleep through it because he knows who God is. He knows who he is. He's not reacting to the others' responses at all. And we've been reading this story with Ali from her kids' Bible. That's where this is from. And I just, the wording of this story is so good because Jesus, when he wakes up, it says, Jesus turned to his wind-torn friends and he says, "Why were you scared?" He asked, "Did you forget who I am? Did you believe your fears instead of me?" Jesus' friends had been so afraid they'd only seen the big waves. They'd forgotten that if Jesus was with them, then they had nothing to be afraid of, no matter how small their boat or how big the storm. Jesus does this perfectly. And again, like everything, he's really the only one who does. Because we're all afraid. We're all like the disciples. And again, I came up here a couple of years ago and gave a message about being wholehearted and trusting God and responding to God wholeheartedly and the battle that was. And it's still a massive battle. And again, just preparing this today and even just this morning, just recognizing, no, I've shrunk back again in my heart. It's scary. It's difficult. It's just so much easier to minimize it, or so much easier to complain, or so much easier to just react rather than actually just stand and trust God and have courage when you don't know what you're doing, when you don't know what the future holds, but his promise is to be with us and to just give ourselves to him and to stand. And that's the one thing that matters. And we fail at it, but Jesus didn't. Jesus stood in the storm. Jesus gave himself wholeheartedly to God when all his friends forsook him, when they ran away. He didn't. He stood and he went through death. And the reason we have hope is because of him. It's not because of me. It's not because of our strategies. It's not because of our plans. It's because Jesus is Lord. He's alive. He's the leader of his church. He's the one who's going ahead. And we just need to respond to him, trust in him, put all our confidence in him, not in our strategies, not in our strength. So we're going to pray to respond today and sing this great song in response. We're planning to sing some extra songs today after the service has finished and just have a bit more of a response time. And again, if you just need to process some of those questions in prayer, I just encourage you to stay around today and to do that. But let's stand together. We can stand now and let's pray. And so, God, I just pray, that prayer that Elijah prayed, Elisha prayed to the servant to open his eyes, Lord. Just pray, God, that you'd open my eyes, Lord. Open our eyes, Lord, as your church. Lord, each person facing battles where they feel surrounded and overwhelmed, open their eyes, Lord. Help us see that, God, when you're with us, we have the greater numbers. We that have the horses and chariots of the Lord surrounding. And we just say we need your spirit. We need your strength. We need your courage. We just thank you, Jesus, for your wholehearted love and response and obedience, and just place all our hope in you. And God, in the challenges that we face as a church, God, as the church in the world, Lord, in this day and age, God, in our local context, we ask that you give us courage, grace to believe you, to recognize that you've moved in the past, you can move again. This is not hard for you at all. It's not. So we place all our hope in you, Lord. We trust in you with everything. We ask you to strengthen us in your name. Amen.